Hello and welcome to my computer science final year project. This is the interim progress demo. My name is Elliot Parnell and my student number is on the page. My project is called Car Compass. It is a AI-driven car recommendation platform for the average user to be able to go out and buy a car based on their preferences without having to know exactly what they're looking for by make and model. Right, so the key stakeholders of this project are obviously, for one, me. I am the main developer, and this project, being a university final year project, is a direct reflection of the skills I've learned over the past 3 years, as well as the skills I'm teaching myself currently to meet this deadline and the upcoming deadlines for this project. The next key stakeholder is obviously my project supervisor. My project and my work reflects mostly on me, but it also reflects heavily on my project supervisor, on their insight and their expertise in guiding me through getting through this final year project, going through things such as deadlines, getting feedback on the actual development, and general guidance overall. The third key stakeholder is my trial users. Later in the project, I plan to do a full user trial where I allow other people from around the university, my project supervisor, and people from my personal circle, such as my family and friends, trial the website and get an idea for not only how the UI works, but overall just getting critical feedback for the project itself. You know, everything from bug fixing to just UI improvements, question suggestions, general constructive criticism to help push the project towards becoming something better. The next key stakeholder is future public users. Like with many students, I am very confident in my project. I feel like it's a very cool, useful project that will have plenty of application in the real world. So future public users are definitely a key stakeholder in this, because it will be their overall opinions and user experience that will determine the success of this website in the real world. And the last key stakeholder is the university markers. Their assessment of my project impacts my academic performance. It reflects my supervisor's job performance. And ultimately, it will help validate me as to whether not only am I ready to go into the working world, but whether my project is ready to be pushed out to public users. Right, formal requirements. Currently, I am making use of Flask for most of my Python backend system, with direct setup for the login systems, which are currently not fully functional, but will be for the final deployment, and SQL Alchemy, which I'm using to store the user data in an SQLite database. That SQLite database is also being used to store quiz answers so that I can directly link in future quiz answers to user accounts. The ChatGPT API is my main backend for artificial intelligence reasoning. And then currently I am programming in a widespread of HTML, CSS, JavaScript, and Python. Future requirements is API key management. Currently, they're just held as simple plain text throughout the code, and for data security, I'm going to have to change that. Polished and more responsive UI. That will be done mostly through HTML and CSS, and of course have its backending still done through Flask. Better account management, so that I can link my quiz answers directly to accounts. And then last but certainly not least is a proper hosting platform, which I will get into later. So, system architecture. The basic page setup and layout is done through HTML. CSS is done for, beautification, simply making it look cohesive. And then JavaScript is, I believe about 50% of the code I've written for this project is JavaScript. It is the main website functionality. For the backend, as I mentioned, I'm using Flask as my overall web framework to, act as the main API to directly link my HTML and CSS with my Python and SQLite. As I mentioned, SQLite is used as general data storage for user details and in future for quiz answers. And Python is what is doing the actual querying of the GPT API. And then my external is the OpenAI API. Currently, I'm using GPT-4o Mini because it has direct internet access, which is very helpful for finding active reviews. And it overall is the most well-rounded external API for AI databasing. Right, so bit of a data flow overview here. I've got my main user input. The user will access the quiz via the main page, which I just call index.html, and they will answer the questions that pop up in their JavaScript questions boxes. And there's also at the very beginning a slider for budget. This all is then taken for backend communication, which is upon quiz completion, I send an AGAX, however you prefer to say it, request to the recommendation endpoint with the user answers. The recommendation endpoint, of course, being ChatGPT. The backend then receives all the data and calls the OpenAI API for the recommendation generation. And that moves us on to processing and response. So the server, i.e. ChatGPT, processes the API response and sends back a simple JSON response containing vehicle recommendations. And also, if the user is authenticated in future, those results will be saved to the server-side database, my SQLite database. And then last but certainly not least is results presentation. So the JavaScript displays the actual vehicle recommendations, and then the results page is a separate page that retrieves and displays previous results through the quiz and allows you to go back and view those at any time. So my current UI, as you can see, is very basic. It was meant to be a demonstration of I have my backend working, I have a lot of my main systems functional, and then the HTML and CSS are just, here's the site. So on the right over here, you can see the car recommendation quiz. This is my initial budget slider. So in this, you slide anywhere from £0 all the way up to $1 million. I use the US dollar symbol in this, and I mentioned in my code that is because I have a US keyboard, so I will go and change everything to pound symbols and local currency when the time comes, but for development, it was a lot easier to stick with the US dollar. So yeah, allows you to select any number from 0 all the way up to $1 million. And I have different individual steps along the way. So I believe it's 10,000, 50,000 is done in increments of 1,000. Everything from there to 150,000 is then done in larger steps of 10,000. And then above that, I move up to 50,000 increments. On the left-hand side here, you can see my previous results page. This is where I am taking the results of my quiz, putting them basically into a simple user output, and then this is copying that exact user output and giving it to me as a nice cohesive list. Currently, I've got some of my testing results there, a nice big red delete key at the bottom to let you know that you can get rid of previous answers if you don't want them cluttering up your page. And as you can see, currently I just have the questions, so the budget, the car type, the fuel type, and the condition, which all pop up as questions after the budget slider. And then followed by that, you get the actual recommendations. I did one simple metric. I chose horsepower as a simple metric for testing, and then read reviews, which are actual links that ChatGPT generates of reviews done by other publications of the vehicles it's recommending. Following on from that, I have register, which as you can see on the top bar, I have login and register. Those are both using the same simple HTML and CSS for the minute, and the functionality is currently not fully implemented. And then feedback form is the same as about, where I just have a simple message saying coming soon. I have previously developed JavaScript-based feedback forms. I will be implementing one that uses a simple email backend system to send feedback on the website from the user to me for development purposes. That will be heavily implemented during the proper testing phases. But for now, that's not there. And then a simple about page for the website will also be coming in future. Right, UI updates. To start off with color scheme, going back, I'm sure you saw, it's very simple, white and blue, standard colors, easy to develop and just easy to demonstrate the back end in the working system. So I have a color scheme in mind. I'll be going from blue to dark green for all the accent colors, with a shift to light gray for the text against the dark green. For slightly better usability and accessibility reasons, I don't want any colors that are too harsh. I find those can cause eye strain, and especially people for vision impairments, that can be extremely difficult to read. And then, similar to that, I'll be also removing the use of the harsh white background, and I'm moving to more of a tan color for a nice tan and dark green sort of overall color scheme. In terms of styling, I'll be moving for the home button to be centralized, and moving to a logo that I have developed. I want to do some finishing touches to the logo before implementing it. Again, this is something I have implemented in previous projects, and something I learned, I believe, in second year of university, so it's something I can easily carry on. Styling, in terms of that, I want to update the slider mechanics. Currently, I find 10,000 to 50,000 is scaled equally, and it's a very small portion at the bottom of the scale, where realistically that is where about 99% of car purchases are going to sit. So my plan is to expand that to about 60 to 70% of the actual bar, with much smaller increments towards the top end for anything up to 1 million, as that is, again, it's a lot more unlikely that we're going to have people looking for £1 million cars on this site. And then last but not least, I want to add a footer bar and socials links to it. I find in terms of modern UI, almost every website links to social media, and almost every website comes with a simple basic footer for additional site navigation, as well as direct links to contacting me, etc. And then in terms of UI functionality, currently I have an error which is caused by a non-direct link between using JavaScript versus using HTML to display which page I'm currently on in the navigation bar. So I want to fix that. And then I would like to adjust the transitions from question to question. Currently, it is just a fairly harsh, here's the next question, here's the next question. I would like to see that move to more of a flowing design and make it a bit more user-friendly. Right, functionality updates. Number 1 is questions. My current questions, as you could see earlier, were very simple. What field type you prefer, what sort of body style you're looking for, your budget. Very simple, very basic. Definitely questions I want to keep in, because having basic answers is extremely vital. But I would like to add additional questions because I want to be able to further refine. And I would like an option at the bottom of each question to say skip, where I can simply not answer that question to allow for a broader search. Account functionality, as I had mentioned, user accounts, I want to be more feature rich, and I want to be able to bind previous answers and history to the account directly instead of the current user session, because currently it's done as a web session. So it holds all of your question answers in your website's local storage. Photos is something I'd really like to implement. I'm doing a lot of research around it currently into APIs such as Unsplash or even the AutoTrader API to get the photos of the vehicles I've recommended. I found a lot of people are more visual learners when it comes to cars, so being able to present them, here's a car, here's some basic specs, like I had used horsepower as the example there, but I will get a longer list of specifications and a photo of said car. I will be keeping it to 2 recommendations per output, as I feel like that's a very reasonable amount. I find going over that, you run into AI hallucination issues in testing. Supporting pages, as I mentioned, I'd like to build out my proper feedback form and my simple about pages. Those are simple, better user experience, and with that, of course, also having things like social links, the footer bar that helps navigation be a little bit more seamless and for better design. And then last but not least is hosting. My website currently is all on localhost, and all processing and development has been done through localhost. I've looked into, because I'm using Flask, I'll be able to use Jinja coding style to be able to host this either through a web server and web host it, but also I run a home server and a home lab at home, and I would be very interested as part of the final year project to learn and develop the skills to host it myself on my own private home servers with a public domain for people to test. And then last but not least is my updated time schedule. So, as with any project, there has been slight instances of scope creep where things have grown more difficult, and then slight instances where my starting scope was far too large for myself to keep up with. This overall has led to a sort of a slight shift in the schedule, especially in sort of the light blue section that you can see here. That's currently where we're at, is the demonstration of the prototype. The initial web design wound up taking less time than initially expected, but it did start a week later than expected. Back-end prototyping, again, similar thing. It started a little later than expected and took about as long as I had expected. The documentation, I found with most programmers, documentation is not my specialty, so doing inline coding comments has been my main form, and then writing simple notes afterwards on what I've done that day. But that's why I've put 75% completion, is that needs to go through and be written sort of in a more cohesive report type way. Same with the documentation of the first prototype test. Whilst I have completed the first prototype test, obviously for the demonstration, I haven't finished going through and properly documenting all the processes behind how I tested it. And then going back a little ways, identification of key stakeholders, that I would say is still 75% complete. As I mentioned, I want to do sort of local testing on it through other users. So I would like to have family members, friends, that sort of thing go through and test. And that will allow me to directly identify names of key stakeholders. And then conducting surveys. I found that over Christmas break, I didn't have the direct human interaction to be able to hand out surveys to people, whether that be online or in person. And so that has unfortunately stalled. So I'll be adjusting my initial surveying of what people want into more feedback surveys, and I'll do 2 rounds of that. One currently, after this demonstration of the prototype, I'll use my localhost prototype, and then a second analysis of my website as a whole further down the line, after I've created what I would like to consider sort of my final version, or at least one of my final versions. And then, moving forward, it seems like everything is still following in line. Evaluating the feedback from this, as well as everything else to come after it, with the documentation of the development, the finalization of the report, write-up of all the key learnings throughout this project, of which there have been numerous, and then, of course, the demonstration of my final product. Those are still to come, but for now, those sort of fall in line. Right. Thank you very much for listening to this. I hope that has acted as a nice, well-rounded overview of where the project currently sits. It's obvious that I have a lot more development to go, but I have solid identification of my key stakeholders. I know exactly where I'm at in terms of development and where I need to push forward with, and I have plans moving forward for everything from development to testing to user feedback. So thank you very much.